I just got contacted by someone who wants their podcast logo turned into a wood sign. So we're going to paint this thing, we're going to stain it, we're going to drip epoxy on it, we're going to cut it out with a CNC. There's a lot of steps going on here, so let's get started on it. So we're starting with a 12-inch by 12-inch board. First thing we're going to do is we're going to paint the surface white. The reason for that is we're going to make some raised letters, and I want those letters to be white. So we're going to recess everything around it over on the CNC once this is done. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to paint a couple more coats of this on. I'm going to make sure I can't see the wood through the paint, and then we'll call it good to go and move over to the CNC. I use a product called Oracal 651 for a mask. So I'm going to just cover over this white paint with this product, and then I can cut away on the CNC and still protect that paint when I go to stain the board after the cutaway. Next, I go over to the CNC machine and I just cut a keyhole slot in the back, and this is simply just to make it so it's easy for someone to hang this on the wall. I have it centered, and there's about 1.25 inch long slot that goes in the back so that you can slide the wall hanging either direction to balance it out. Next, we have the cutout. Now, what I did was I am going to actually have the letters raised in this. So I used a 1/4 inch downcut bit, and I cut out just the main area around the letters. Now, a 1/4 inch bit does not provide near enough detail needed to actually make it so this thing looks how it's supposed to look. So I have to come back in here and use a V-bit, and what we're going to use for that is a 45-degree V-bit, and I can put a link to these bits I use. They're really good. I get them from Tools Today, and they cut amazing, so I would highly recommend them. Those links will be down in the description, but anyways, so the V-bit will come back in and it just cleans everything up and gives all the detail needed around the lettering and makes it look how it's supposed to. Now, I did have a few little issues, the depth, because I don't have any kind of device to set the depth consistently when I make a bit change. So what I have to do is I have to do it manually, and every once in a while when you do that, it doesn't quite get set to the right depth. So what I had to do was go back in with a smaller downcut bit and just cut around the lettering with that to even things up, because I had a little bit deeper cut on the V-groove bit. So I don't actually show that part, but I did have a little minor problem with that could be remedied if I had something like an automatic bit height setter to set your Z-axis. Next, I used a stain and polyurethane mix in a spray can. I chose a spray because I wanted to make sure I got down in all the little grooves around the lettering, and I thought I probably would have trouble using a normal wipe-on stain and brush-on poly. So I did have some problems with this can. It was not wanting to spray right at first. It almost seemed like the nozzle was clogged, but I got it to clear and ended up getting a nice coat on there. Next is kind of a fun part. I get a razor blade out and just lightly pick the corner up off that mask, and we're going to peel that mask off and reveal that white paint that we painted back in the very first step. It takes a little bit of time. You got to be careful because you don't want to gouge the wood, so you kind of have to go in at a low angle, but once you get that corner picked up, it's easy to peel them right off. So we do that, and then we're ready for the next step. Next, we are going to add some epoxy. Now, the look I was going for was I wanted it to look like it was dripping down the face. So I mixed the epoxy up. I let it set for a while, and then I kept checking the thickness of it. Once I thought it seemed like it was going to start hardening inside the mixing container, I poured it on. Now, I did run into some problems. I really wanted some drips, and you can see I'm tilting the board. I'm trying to draw out some drip lines, and it was not forming what looked like drips running down a board. And I kept working with it, and just as it was starting to harden, I just decided to abandon ship. And so I actually scraped it all off, or most of it off, with the stirring stick. And what ended up happening is some of it remained on there. And the problem was then that I had this weird look. I almost scrapped the whole project. But I like to be transparent with you guys, so I'll just tell you there were clumps that were left after I scraped it off. So I decided to come back in and pour some new over top. And the clumps, at first I thought they were going to ruin it, and they actually gave it some nice depth once I poured over top of it. And we didn't get the exact look I was going for, but it got it close. It definitely looks similar. So I decided to just roll with it and see how it ended up. And it turned out really good, actually, when it was all said and done. It's just that scraping it off was a little bit stressful. For this final coat of epoxy, I went back to the idea or the technique I use when I do countertops, and I actually taped up the edge to form kind of like a dam to hold the epoxy on the surface longer so it would have a chance to settle instead of just running right off the sides. So I wanted it to drip down the sides because I wanted to give that effect that the entire side was also covered. And so that's how I went. And it was actually leaking out some too. So I had to wait until it hardened, and then I retained a little bit back in the cup and poured that out right at the very end. With the technique I used here, I again just kind of try to form drips on top of what was already there just to give it some thickness and depth. My initial thought was to try to cover up some of the dried on pieces from my first failed attempt at this. And I didn't get it all covered up, and I'm actually really glad I didn't because, like I said before, it gave a lot of nice depth and a little bit of character to it, so it just didn't look real flat and kind of just boring. So it ended up turning out really good in the end. Now I have drips of epoxy on the bottom of this that need sanded off so this thing will hang flat on the wall. You can see here's what we came up with. Yeah, so you can see we just sanded off those bumps, and it's best to do that with a older piece of sandpaper. So I had one that the paper was starting to tear on it, and I just used that. And you can see right here, it looked like that. I didn't really care about the quality of the sanding. I just wanted to take the bumps off. So I used that older piece of sandpaper. Here's the final result. Let's scoot back so you can see it. Thanks for watching. And we got a table that I'm working on right now here, a epoxy river table. So that is my next project. It's almost done. It should be my next video after this. And I'll have a link to it here on the next screen. See you next time.